Hi, this is Matt at LSAT Lab, and today's lesson is on must-be-false questions in the logical reasoning section. And while they're not a very common question type, only about 1% of all logical reasoning questions are must-be-false questions. They are a tricky question type, and one that if you can add to your repertoire, they're not that different than must-be-true questions. So in this lesson, we want to cover how to spot a must-be-false question, what the process is for approaching one, what the reasoning structures you want to pay attention to are, and how you want to use trap answers to make eliminations here. So when you're looking at the question stem, you're literally looking for the words must be false or an equivalent thereof. And there's a couple that are pretty common. So which one of the following must be false? Or if the statements above are true, which one of the following cannot be true? And finally, if the claims made above are true, then each of the following could be true except. So must be false, cannot be true, could be true except are all different ways of saying the same thing. So now that we know how to spot one, the process that you want to take when you're working on a must be false question is the same as the other question types within the inference family. So you want to first start by finding the related statements, then identify the reasoning structure that connects them, use that to anticipate what an answer might sound like, and then use trap answers as you navigate the answer choices. So now the reasoning structure that you want to pay most attention to when you're working on must-be-false questions is conditional logic. 89% of must-be-false questions use or rely on conditional logic as the foundation of the argument's reasoning structure. So here's an example question. Go ahead and give this one a try. And when you have an answer that you like, hit play and check your work. All right. So again, like most questions in the inference family, we're given a set of facts inside of the stimulus. So we don't have to find the conclusion. We don't have to evaluate the reasoning. We just need to understand how the facts connect. And on must-be-false questions, you're much less likely to need to connect the statements. In fact, oftentimes the right answer comes from simply contradicting one of the original statements. Now, sometimes it comes from contradicting an inference thereof, but you don't necessarily have to go that far. So let's see what the statements give us. They tell us that there are two things true of all immoral actions. First, if they are performed in public, they offend public sensibilities. So we have that if-then relationship in the second statement. If they are performed in public, then they offend public sensibilities. We could notate that and build an if-then relationship to help us keep track of the different statements that are being presented here. So now the tricky part is the way in which these statements are being presented to us. These statements, the first and the second, are about immoral actions, and they're true about all immoral actions. So when we think about how to put that first claim into notation, not only are we talking about those that are performed in public, but we're talking about immoral actions. And we probably want to put that into the notation. So if an action is immoral and it's performed in public, then we can infer that it offends public sensibilities. And putting that immoral piece into that first relationship is critical. It also helps to see it as it carries over into the second relationship, because the second relationship isn't really presented as a relationship. It's just stated as a fact that's true about all immoral actions. And if we didn't consider that very first sentence, we might not see that second part as an if-then relationship. But because we know that this is talking about immoral actions, we can take it and diagram it as if it's an immoral action, then it's accompanied by feelings of guilt. So now, while these two statements don't necessarily connect together, we can use them to anticipate what an answer might sound like. So if we're going to contradict the first relationship, we would be looking for an answer choice that is talking about an immoral action that's performed in public, but that does not offend public sensibilities. And if we're looking to contradict the second statement, we're looking for an action that is immoral, but not accompanied by feelings of guilt. So now that we know how to contradict either one of these two statements, we're going to go see if we can find one of those in the answer choices. So answer choice A says that some immoral actions that are not performed in public are not accompanied by feelings of guilt. So these are immoral actions. Okay, so we have not met the trigger of the first rule. We have met the trigger of the second rule. Are not performed in public. Okay, so the first rule is no longer being considered. If this is going to break one of those two rules, it'll be breaking the second rule. Are not accompanied by feelings of guilt. We know that all immoral actions, regardless of whether they're performed in public or not, are accompanied by feelings of guilt. So answer choice A contradicts the second relationship. Let's hold on to it and see if anything else also looks good. Answer choice B says immoral actions are wrong solely by virtue of being accompanied by feelings of guilt. Whether or not immoral actions are wrong was never discussed inside of the statements, so this is simply out of scope. Answer choice C says that some actions that offend public sensibilities if they are performed in public are not accompanied by feelings of guilt. Well, answer choice C says nothing about whether these actions are immoral actions. And both of the rules that were set up are about immoral actions. So C does not meet the sufficient condition of either of those two rules, and so C cannot contradict either of them. C is simply an unsupported relationship, blending the necessary condition of the first rule with the denial of the necessary condition of the second rule. Answer choice D says some actions that are accompanied by feelings of guilt are not immoral. Okay, so now they're not immoral. So that does not meet the sufficient condition of either of the two relationships. And so we can get rid of D as well. D is simply attempting to refute the reversal of the second relationship. Right? So if the second relationship said all actions that are accompanied by feelings of guilt are immoral, then answer choice D would contradict that claim. But that's a reversal of what we were given. And so D doesn't actually contradict the second claim. We can get rid of it. It would require a reversal of the second statement in order for us to say that it does contradict that claim. Answer choice E says that every action performed in public that is accompanied by feelings of guilt is immoral. So this is a modified version of a reversal of the second premise. So now, a reversal, while it doesn't necessarily follow from the original idea, it doesn't contradict the original idea either. So some people, when they're learning about reversals and negations and contrapositives, they take it a little too far. And while we know that a reversal or a negation cannot be inferred from an original claim, that does not mean that they must be false given the original claim. So this may be tempting for somebody who thinks that a reversal must be false, but it doesn't. And so it's wrong. And that leaves us with answer choice A as the right answer. So now let's look at a more minor reasoning structure when you're working on must be false questions. Occasionally this might show up as well. But it gives you a little bit of insight into how the other reasoning structures like comparison or causation might be played out on a must be false question. So here's an example question. Go ahead and give this one a try. And when you have an answer that you like, hit play again, and we'll check your work. All right, welcome back. So now this question is giving us a lot of information about sharks, and it's comparing sharks with other organisms. And so what we want to do is kind of track those comparisons that are being made. So the first statement says that sharks have a higher ratio of cartilage mass to body mass than any other organism. So with regard to the ratio of cartilage mass to body mass, sharks have a higher ratio than any other organism. So now the second statement says that sharks also have a greater resistance to cancer than any other organism. So with regard to their ability to resist cancer, sharks have a greater ability than other organisms. Then the third statement says that shark cartilage contains a substance that inhibits tumor growth by stopping the development of a new blood network. Well, this is not exactly a comparison. It's telling us how their cancer resistance works, but it's not comparing sharks against others. And that third statement is actually probably fluff. So let's move past it and look at the last statement. In the past 20 years, none of the responses among terminal cancer patients to various therapeutic measures has been more positive than the response among those who consumed shark cartilage. So with regard to patients and their response to various therapeutic measures, patients have a better response to shark cartilage than to other treatments. So now we've got three different relationships between sharks and other organisms. And what we're looking for is an answer choice to simply contradict any one of them. So if the claims made above are true, then each of the following could be true, except this is a must be false question. Answer choice A says that no organism resists cancer better than sharks do, but some resist cancer as well as sharks. So if we look at the second relationship between how sharks resist cancer and how other organisms resist cancer, it says that sharks have a greater resistance to cancer than any other organism. And so the first part of answer choice A is consistent with that no organism resists cancer better than sharks do. But the second part of A gets into trouble because sharks can't be tied with some other organism. Sharks resist cancer better than anyone else. So answer choice A contradicts the second relationship, and let's hold on to it as possibly the right answer. Answer choice B says that the organism most susceptible to cancer has a higher percentage of cartilage than some organisms that are less susceptible to cancer. So what is the organism most susceptible to cancer? We were never given that information. We know it's not sharks, but we weren't given which organism has or is most susceptible to cancer. So to compare the percentage of cartilage that some organisms have, or at least this organism compared to other organisms, right, that are less susceptible to cancer, well, that doesn't necessarily mean sharks. So essentially, we're comparing two organisms that are not sharks to each other. This is not going to be something we're going to be able to sustain or contradict. That's an unsupported relationship. Answer choice C says, the substance in shark cartilage that inhibits tumor growth is found in most organisms. Well, this gets back to that third statement that we kind of passed by, but we don't know whether that particular substance is found in any other organism. They dropped the conversation in the third statement. So this is simply an unsupported relationship. Answer choice D says that in the past 20 years, many terminal cancer patients have improved dramatically following many sorts of therapy. Well, this doesn't necessarily contradict the statements. It depends on how people respond to those other therapies. We know that these patients are responding better to the shark cartilage therapies than to other therapies, but that does not mean that they're not responding to those other therapies. So answer choice D is simply too weak. In order to contradict this idea, we would need to know about the way in which they respond, and that it's either potentially better than the way they respond to sharks. That would contradict the final claim. But as it is, it's simply too weak. E, some organisms have immune systems more efficient than a shark's immune system. And well, immune systems were never discussed here. That's out of scope. Let's get rid of E. And so now we know A is the right answer. All right, so when we're working through these questions, we notice that many of the answer choices are wrong because they're out of scope. Many of them are wrong because they're simply built around unsupported relationships. They're taking terms from within the statements and then connecting them in ways that weren't made within the original set of statements. And so they represent unsupported relationships. Sometimes answer choices are simply wrong on must be false questions because the idea itself is actually supported by the statements. This is a corollary to on a must be true question, an answer choice that could be wrong because it's simply contradicting the statements. Well, an answer choice that is being supported by the statements would be wrong on a must be false question. Answer choices that represent unsupported comparisons are very similar to unsupported relationships and reversals. So answer choices built around reversing the conditional relationship. And then, of course, answer choices can be wrong on must be false questions for simply being too weak. Answer choices on must be true questions, the weaker, the better. The less you say, the better it is, because an answer choice can get into trouble, can go beyond what you know when it says too much. But in order to contradict an idea, a very strong, bold statement is going to be much easier to contradict than a weak, tepid statement. And so sometimes answer choices can simply be wrong on a must be false question because they don't represent an idea forcefully enough for it to contradict the statements that were made inside of the stimulus. So the process, remember, when you're working on must be false questions is to find related statements to see if there's a connection that can be made between them. Use reasoning structures to help you see how those statements can be connected. Use that understanding to anticipate an answer possibly, and then use trap answers to work through the wrong answer choices. You spot a must be false question with the language in the question stem. You're looking for must be false or cannot be true or could be true except. The reasoning structures that you want to pay most attention to are conditional logic. That's the major player on must be false questions. And then comparison and causation can play minor roles as well. The trap answers to pay attention to are those that are out of scope, building unsupported relationships, those that are being supported by the statements, or those that are building unsupported comparisons. Sometimes you want to be paying attention to answer choices that are built around a reversal or answer choices that are simply too weak to actually contradict one of the original claims. So that's it for Must Be False Questions. I invite you to check out some of these other lessons or visit us today at lsatlab.com.